Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. December 7th, 75 years ago, the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And so certainly that's something we can talk about a little bit later when we open up the phones. And for those of you that are watching online on our video, you might notice behind me a birthday balloon. Yes, I was born on December 7th, 10 years to the day of the bombing of Pearl Harbor. But nevertheless, this is also my birthday, so I thought I'd mention that real quickly. Lots of issues in the news before we get to our conversation with Michelle Malkin, which we will in just about a minute or two. And that is Donald Trump today was named Person of the Year by Time magazine, and certainly that is something we can talk about a little bit later. And also today we have Donald Trump announcing that his head of the Department of Homeland Security is an individual that we didn't necessarily expect, but still might be a good choice. Marine General John Kelly to lead the Department of Homeland Security, individual who will oversee border security, and a man that has been the former head, I should mention, of the military Southern Command, where he was responsible for U.S. military activities and relationships in Latin America and the Caribbean. A 45-year military career, and we'll have more to say about that in just a minute. But we are delighted to have Michelle Malkin, and I have been one of those charter subscribers of CRTV and have been watching Mark Levin for some time, and then heard that Michelle Malkin's investigative reports were going to be on there. And so I knew they're going to come out on Monday, and I was kind of like a kid just before Christmas, on Christmas Eve. Sunday night, I'm thinking, I wonder if they put it up there early. No. Looked at it Monday morning. No, it wasn't there. Monday afternoon. Finally, I started having a chance to watch all of her investigative reports. And so we're going to be talking about that. And if you're not familiar with Michelle Malkin, she's been on the program with us many times before. Conservative author, blogger, columnist, entrepreneur, columnist with Creators Syndicate. And again, those of you watching online, I'm holding up some of her books. Here's Unhinged, Exposing Liberals Gone Wild. And then, of course, Invasion, How America Still Welcomes Terrorists, Criminals, and Other Foreign Menaces to Our Shores. Who built that? Again, we might get into that a little bit when we talk about the carrier deal. And then, of course, her book, Culture of Corruption. Michelle Malkin, welcome back to Point of View.
Kerby, thanks for having me back.
Let's, if we can, start with CRTV. I am very excited about this because I certainly have appreciated Mark Levin, and watching some of his pieces are well done. And then I knew Mark Stein. Of course, I quote him quite often. Then when I found out you were going to do these investigative reports, I've been waiting and didn't have a chance to start watching them till Tuesday, and had to kind of binge watch my way through Daniel in the Den, Black Lives Matter, and EB5. We'll kind of break those out a little bit. But let me just say that, first of all, you're an outstanding investigative reporter, and the sets that they put you on, they're as good or really better than anything I've ever seen, 20, 60 minutes. So tremendous production values behind what you're actually doing on air.
Oh, I appreciate that so much. I am so excited and proud to be part of this new and really groundbreaking venture. And we want to offer both high-quality, substantive content along with a competitive production value that matches or surpasses anything that you've seen on regular TV or cable news or anywhere else on the Internet. And I think that this political season, this campaign season, the last year, was really in large part a referendum on people's disgust, outrage, sense of frustration, not only with establishment politics, but I also think with establishment media. And that's what's really driving the CRTV.com engine. people are tired of subsidizing so-called journalism that is contemptuous of their beliefs, their religious beliefs, their political beliefs, their cultural beliefs. They're tired of corrupt media that pretends to be objective and yet in some cases is directly and explicitly colluding with Democratic and left-wing political causes and candidates. And throughout the 25 years, Kerby, that I have been involved in the political news and opinion business, I have never hidden what my core principles are, my faith, my commitment to certain ideals in America. And that is the perspective that I bring to my reporting, but it is as thorough and hard-edged and as news-breaking as 60 Minutes or 2020, and it's really a chance to delve much deeper than just superficial sound bites and headlines.
Well, again, hard-hitting. Let me pick up on that for just a second, because there's one place where you're asking some tough questions of a prosecutor, and I'll get into the details later. But that's where they say, whoa, wait a minute, you can't ask those questions. The tone is going the wrong direction. And I thought, I was so glad you showed that, because you're not willing to lay down and not willing to be like what we oftentimes call the corporate media, which basically has some do not trespass signs even when they do these so-called hard-hitting interviews. Because as we say here at Point of View, every issue's on the table. And I get the sense for Michelle Malkin, every issue's on the table, right?
That is exactly right, and I love that you picked up on a scene in one of our first episodes where I traveled to Oklahoma City and asked some uncomfortable questions. It's very interesting, actually. We put up a billboard in Oklahoma City advertising one of our shows, and it merely asked the question of the subject of our investigation, quote, "What if he didn't do it?" And social justice groups got so mad that we merely asked a question that they forced the billboard company to yank down our sign.
Yes, I was going to talk about that billboard, but that is, again, a great illustration. And just before we take a break, because we're going to get into some of the issues in CRTV, but I'd love to get your thoughts about certainly to pick for the Department of Homeland Security because of invasion. Love to get your thoughts, obviously, about the carrier decision in light of your book, Who Built That? But, we are talking right now to people that already sort of buy the idea. When Marlon Maddox started Point of View more than 40 years ago, he recognized that he had to provide an end run around the mainstream media at that time. And even now we find that there are people, Michelle, that sometimes call and say, I don't even watch television. I listen to you just to find out what's going on. Here, even though it's called CRTV, you can watch it on your computer. I have the app, so I also watch it on my phone. So this is a way to hear from Mark Levin and Mark Stein and Michelle Malkin and Crowder and a number of people that will be part of that lineup and really get the truth that, frankly, the corporate media will just never cover.
Bingo. I'm so glad that you mentioned the legacy that you and Marlon have established here, because I always pay tribute to talk radio, both talk radio of faith and in the secular market, certainly too, with a lot of the godfathers of political talk radio who are right-leaning and right-thinking. And you were really at the vanguard, at the forefront of, as you say, circumventing the traditional establishment centers of media and information power. So we're really trying to even extend that further in the 21st century here, and it's exciting because I'm like so many other people out there, and I'm sure so many of your own listeners, Kerby, who have cut the cord. I don't want to subsidize CNN and MSNBC when all they do is denigrate, and marginalize, and demonize us.
Michelle Malkin with us. We'll come back and talk a little bit more about some of her investigative reports. Of course, we'll open up the phones for your comments. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Today is December 7th, a day that President Roosevelt said would be a date which would live in infamy. On that fateful morning of December 7th, 1941, America was attacked without warning. More than 2,400 Americans died and 1,100 were wounded. Our country was changed forever. This attack led us into war, and the citizens of America responded with courage and resolve. So it may be well to reflect on what took place and how we today must also rise to the occasion of an attack on America more than a decade ago. Today is known as National Pearl Harbor Remembrance Day. It is a day when we honor the lives lost in that attack on Pearl Harbor and also honor the veterans of World War II. But it can also be a day in which we also pay tribute to the men and women who are currently serving in the armed forces in an effort to promote freedom and justice around the world. If you travel to Hawaii, you need to stop at the memorial in Pearl Harbor. The USS Arizona stands as a testimony to the 177 crew members who died as a result of the attack on December 7th. I understand that more than 40 million visitors have visited that memorial and have therefore honored their heroic efforts of the sailors and Marines. If you've been there, you know that it has become a sacred place as well as a reminder of what can happen when others, either a nation or terrorists, attack this nation. In 1941, the enemies of the United States were Japan and Germany. Today, they're our friends, but we have new enemies, terrorists who want to destroy us and destroy our way of life. We are protected from their evil intentions by those who serve in uniform. So today, take a moment to reflect on your freedom that was bought with a price, and honor those who died for your freedoms and honor those who protect you today. December 7th is an important day, and I didn't want it to pass without challenging you to consider its importance. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Power of Three and Smith Global Media present Believe. One boy's decision to believe could change everything. Believe, rated PG, now playing. Believe.film.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us today Michelle Malkin as we talk about some very important issues. And first, we're going to focus on a couple of her investigative stories in CRTV and then look at some of the broader news issues. But Michelle, take us to this first series of investigative reports. When I first knew that you were going to be doing this, I thought you'd be maybe doing some whistleblowing or looking at some of what you call the weasels in government. But you instead focused a fair amount of attention on Daniel in the den, an officer that was, as I seem to be now, not served well by justice. And if people don't think it's controversial, just think about the fact that they took down the billboard in Oklahoma City. So it illustrates a point, but explain why you decided to get involved in that particular investigative report.
Yeah, well, first I'll give you a little bit of background and context here on an issue that has been near and dear to my heart, and that is supporting our men and women in uniform, our law enforcement officers on the thin blue line. I've just always had a sense of gratitude about those who serve and protect us. And over the course of my career, I have done so many columns and blog posts and commentaries and investigative reports in print, Kerby, on the ways in which the anti-police poison from left-wing progressivism has essentially cost us lives. In the 1970s, there was a rash of ambushes and assassinations of police officers that was instigated by left-wing social justice groups like the Black Liberation Army, for example, and certainly enabled by the rhetoric of the Black Panther Party. This became popularized in the culture, in Hollywood, in academia, and then we had Barack Obama ascend to office, and over the last 8 years, violence against police officers has exploded. The number of police ambushes and deadly assassinations has spiked 167%, Kerby, over the last 2 years. And I've done as much as I could to illuminate the rhetoric, the ideology that has done so much to sabotage law, order, and public safety in our country. All that said, I have been particularly concerned about recent groups like Black Lives Matter, which essentially inherited that ideology from the 1970s. And so many of these agitators have gone around explicitly with death threats and death wishes for our police, and we saw it in Dallas, we saw it in Baton Rouge, and even just today, hours ago, a police officer ambushed in Georgia a man on the run now for that, and it looks like it's the same sort of storyline. So I hear from the families of police officers, the friends of police officers all the time, and one of them wrote to me from Oklahoma and was a family friend of a man named Daniel Holtzclaw. Some of your listeners might possibly be vaguely familiar with the name because a year ago this week he was convicted, and the verdict was announced exactly 1 year ago on Saturday, as a matter of fact. And he was convicted for a series of terrible sexual assaults. And I just assumed when I saw the fleeting headlines a year ago that he was guilty because it sounded horrible. There were a number of accusers. And this woman begged me to look further into the case and to really look at another side of the story, his side of the story. And that's what I've done. That's what I've been preoccupied with for the last several months. I won't go into too much detail here. I don't know how much is appropriate to talk about on radio, but I would urge people to watch the whole series and look at an investigative written piece that I did as a companion piece on my website. I will tell you this. It is on purpose that the name of the series is Daniel in the Den. Mm-hmm. He is a young, idealistic man of faith, a strong Christian with a wonderful family. He was railroaded and I believe was a very, very horrible victim, scapegoat of the social justice mob and moral cowardice in Oklahoma City's political establishment.
Well, again, one of your other pieces is on Black Lives Matter, and let's talk about the impact, the negative impact it's having. First of all, we've had Heather McDonald on this program talking about the Ferguson effect and the war against cops. And so, first of all, there's the negative in that these communities, which may have been safer in the past, aren't now because of some of the Black Lives Matter. And then the second point is, of course, the title of her book and just what you just talked about a minute ago, the war against cops. So those in law enforcement are not as safe because now there seems to be a breaking down of barriers and a lack of respect. And so not only do the police officers and their families face this, but those in these communities face the problem that some of the kind of preemptive policing isn't taking place. Isn't that what you're finding?
Absolutely, that's what we're finding. And it is almost cancerous. I don't mean to be hyperbolic. I actually really do believe that it is metastasizing in so many of the inner cities of America. And those hardworking, ordinary Americans who are just trying to provide for the families are the ones who are left most vulnerable. Heather McDonald is brilliant. I've known her for years. She's one of America's greatest intellectual thinkers, reporters, and cultural observers, and she was way ahead of the curve with the war on cops. What we've done in another episode that is available immediately to anyone who subscribes to crtv.com is look at another very troublesome aspect of the Black Lives Matter movement, and that is the fact that so many of them are in positions of influence in our public schools, in the government schools. Yeah. And we look at how the curriculum, which is unapologetically anti-police and anti-law and order, is affecting our children. Education is an issue that is near and dear to my heart. I have a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old who we are homeschooling to try and protect them from Fed Ed and Common Core. And this is just one more thing for parents to have to guard against and monitor.
By the way, in the second hour, second half of this hour, I want to talk also with you about Common Core and about the Secretary of Education that's being tapped and some of those issues. But just before we get to this break, I think Mark Levin and everybody else, including you, would say, why don't you explain a little bit about how easy it is to sign up for crtv.com? Now, I've already done that. I was a charter subscriber. I benefited from that. But still, for a one-time fee for an entire year, you have access to Mark Levin, Mark Stein, Michelle Malkin, and all sorts of other people. I'm sure you're going to add more to the lineup. But explain what is available as people sign up.
Yes, all you have to do is go to crtv.com, and it's super easy. There's a big button that says Order Now, and then as soon as you do that, you will have immediate access to my first 4 episodes. My original series, Michelle Malkin Investigates, is sort of modeled along the lines of a Netflix TV series. And so we've delivered the first 4, and in coming weeks and months, you'll get another total of 9 for a full season of 13. And very meaty, very substantive, about an hour-long program for each episode. Then, of course, you get the iconic, the great one, Mark Levin, who has a daily TV show. If you're sick of seeing, so many nasty, condescending people on the cable news and the same people over and over and over saying the same types of things, you'll love Levin TV. He is one of the most brilliant people I have ever encountered in my career. Mark Stein, who, as you mentioned, Kerby, is a frequent guest host for Rush Limbaugh, is such a colorful, wonderful, debonair personality, and then Steven Crowder as well.
So again, those are all opportunities for you. crtv.com. Of course, we have a link to Conservative Review as well and information about Michelle Malkin. Let's take a break. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about what's happened in Homeland Security. One of the other pieces in her CRTV is EB5, the visa scam. I'll try to explain that and I'll let her explain that, get her comments about who has been tapped as the Department of Homeland Security, who's been tapped in the Department of Education. What about the decision for carrier that Donald Trump negotiated? We have a lot more to talk about, but if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. As you go to our website, you will see my commentary. You will see the information about Michelle Malkin. And don't forget, we have an Alaska cruise coming in August. Kelly Shackelford and his wife, Penna Dexter, and her husband and I will be here with my family as we travel to Alaska. It'll be a lot like our roundtable discussion where we have Penna Dexter and Kelly Shackelford and others discussing those issues, but also just exploring the Alaska wilderness. So take the time to find some of those material. And don't forget, we also have this video on freedom and the difference between North Korea and South Korea. Just by looking at the lights alone tells you a lot about freedom. So that video is available. It's all available at the website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
When you hear the phrase spiritual warfare, what comes to mind? If you have a negative reaction, that's unfortunate, because the Bible reveals that the battle is real. As Kerby recently wrote to our partners, Romans 12:2 tells us not to be conformed to the culture, but to be transformed by the renewal of our minds. It warns us about being taken captive by alien philosophies and deceit. There is a spiritual battle underway for the minds of our neighbors. It's a time when the shapers of our culture are calling evil good and good evil. What can you do? Get a copy, a free copy, of Kerby Anderson's new ebook, Spiritual Warfare, The Battle to Restore Christ in Our Culture. It is a spiritual battle, and it must be fought with spiritual weapons. Get your copy with our compliments at pointofview.net. Look for Spiritual Warfare, pointofview.net. Spiritual Warfare, The Battle to Restore Christ in Our Culture, by Kerby Anderson. It's free when you visit pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll get to some of those phone calls in just a minute. Michelle Malkin with us. And Michelle, I thought we might, for just a minute, talk about the new head of the Department of Homeland Security. Of course, again, that has to be confirmed by Congress. But I remember many years ago when I was doing some live remotes for Point of View, and we were in Kansas, and I met this guy, Chris Kobach, as he was first running for office. And I know you have had the same respect for him that I have, and I thought maybe he would be tapped. We'll see if he ends up in the administration. But any comments about the new head, at least tapped head for the Department of Homeland Security, John Kelly?
Well, he certainly seems able to command large, massive organizations that are dedicated to our national security as head of the Southern Command, and then, of course, with oversight over Guantanamo Bay, and certainly being in Florida. He is not unfamiliar with immigration enforcement and having to stop cartels that were engaged in, for example, human trafficking through our southern ports. All that said, I was extremely disappointed that it was not Chris Kobach. As you mentioned, I have a massive amount of respect for him, not only as a pivotal patriot in the fight for immigration enforcement and sovereignty. He once joked in a profile about him that some people golf on the weekends, I defend American sovereignty. And I just thought this is a perfect fit for the Donald Trump administration, volunteering his time essentially when he was not using his official platform as Secretary of State to fight on behalf of the citizens of Kansas, but all of us when it came to fighting the wages and consequences of open borders. I hope that he takes one of the top echelon positions as a deputy, either running ICE or as John Kelly's right-hand man. But John Kelly, I would say, seems to have at least that same commitment to putting America and American borders and American rule of law first. So I am hopeful, and it is definitely better than what the alternative would have been under a Hillary Clinton administration.
We could always say that. Okay, 14 years ago, you wrote Invasion. I looked it up, 2002. You were 5 at the time, of course, but, I'm just kidding. But, I mean, can you believe that? 14 years ago, and yet that book was prophetic, wasn't it? I mean, we are now 14 years later finally getting serious about something you wrote back in 2002 where we talked about that with you on Point of View. Yes,
wow. Boy, does time fly, and yet in that time so little had changed. It seemed as if people were coming to their epiphanies and embracing the message of invasion at a glacial pace, and it took Donald Trump, this, very maverick and often controversial and divisive figure, to finally effect the kind of change that I've been advocating for so long, and really dating back to the early 1990s when I started working and reporting and writing from Los Angeles, which was definitely ground zero in these kinds of battles. And, it has been very wrenching for a lot of my friends, even within the conservative movement. But I think for those of us who've had a big picture, we understood what it was going to take to finally drain the swamp, as Donald Trump and his supporters like to put it.
Just before we take a phone call, one of your other CRTV investigative reports is on EB5. I really want people to watch that because it's a whole scam about visas. And, of course, that's another aspect of invasion, isn't it? It's a different kind. They're not walking across the border, but they're coming here. You have people overstaying their visas, and you've got these sort of sham visas. Give us just maybe a brief summary, and if nothing else, that will encourage people to go to CRTV and have a chance to read and hear all about it.
Yeah, I hope so. This is really like nothing you've ever seen on most of the cable TV shows that spend 3 minutes on a topic, and most of that yelling at each other and unintelligible, unable to hear anything. But viewers of this episode of Michelle Malkin Investigates will learn about this shocking scam that's actually run. The problem isn't that it's illegal, it's that it's perfectly legal to sell green cards and eventually American citizenship up for sale to the highest foreign bidder in a program called EB5 that has no oversight. And so we traveled to a little town in Vermont where progressive Bernie Sanders and that reliable, staunch, old Beltway Barnacle liberal Pat Leahy embraced this program that was abused by some of their crony donors. It was supposed to benefit American workers because the stated deal is that these wealthy foreign investors, a lot of them from China, invest in American redevelopment projects or real estate projects and are supposed to create a number of jobs so that all these politicians can say that they're creating jobs. But as I said, there's almost no oversight. There's a lot of book cooking that goes on, very similar to the kind of book cooking on jobs numbers that we saw under the Obama administration with the so-called stimulus package that cost us so much more money than it did create jobs. And it's supposed to benefit in particular rural areas. And what we've done is laid out and showed you the devastation in the small Vermont town that happens when you've got crony socialists in government teaming up with these big government Democrats, and unfortunately some Republicans. We mentioned several programs in other red states that have also ripped off the American taxpayer.
So again, at crtv.com, let's take some phone calls. Michelle Malkin with us. We'll head first to the state of Georgia. John, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
How you doing?
Very good. What would you like to add to our conversation today?
Yes, I'd like to contribute to the conversation. Your guest, Michelle, I feel that she is biased in the wrong way because she's talking about how the cop killing is related to Black Lives Matter. It is related to the Black Panthers. She has not talked about how the cops are killing black people and getting away in the courts. They're showing it on television where the cops are actually shooting people running away, and they're getting away with it.
I'm talking about the South Carolina case. Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with the show called Cops Reload, and that is an example of what's going on in the world today. When they arrest a black person, they put their face into the concrete. When they arrest a white person, they stand, they're not even on the ground. And that is what's going on now, Ferguson, Carolina, other parts of, even Texas, other parts of this country. But she needs to understand that the Black Panthers, Black Lives Matter, are not all these people that are killing cops. You have white people killing cops.
Sure. Okay. Michelle, your comments.
Well, he raises a number of points of conversation that I'd like to engage in, and one he mentioned, Ferguson. Of course, the hands up, don't shoot lie was perpetrated by Black Lives Matter. There was a rush to judgment. So many irresponsible media outlets adopted that as truth before they actually looked at the evidence, and even the left-wing Obama Justice Department, which has been outright hostile to law enforcement communities across America, had to acknowledge that it was a myth, that it was a complete figment of imagination. That's the problem here, and that's exactly why I think CRTV and my show are serving a vital purpose. People rush to judgment. They don't look at the evidence. They're actually not doing journalism. Your caller also mentioned the South Carolina case, and in that case, I am heartened that there was at least one brave juror who refused to take away a man's livelihood and his freedom based on the evidence. All of these knee-jerk, armchair, quarterbacking so-called legal analysts on TV who did not sit through the entire trial, who did not watch all of the testimony, who did not get to consider the mounds of evidence in that case and each one of these cases where they all pretend to know that they know every last detail. That's what, to me, is so alarming, Kerby, about how public opinion is shaped and how so many of these law enforcement officers are convicted in the court of opinion before they've had their day in the court of law.
You might also, and maybe this is a future investigative piece, look at the case of Michael Slager shooting Walter Scott, because what we see is something that doesn't look right, obviously. And then, of course, in terms of the jury and the evidence, there are a lot of people that say, if nothing else, to use a trite phrase, the optics don't look right. So let's take a break. We'll come back and we'll take some more phone calls. Of course, I want to get your opinion on a couple of other issues. Anybody that wrote about the Carrier Corporation and who built that probably has some thoughts. And if there's one thing we know Michelle Malkin for, in addition to the issue of immigration, it is Common Core. I'd love to get her thoughts about the tapped Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, and what her thoughts are about that. So there's a lot more to cover. We'll try to do that right after these important messages.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. In 2010, the city of Austin, Texas, a town that takes pride in keeping itself weird, passed an ordinance that targeted pro-life Christian pregnancy resource centers. These centers, as you may guess, care for women during their pregnancies, helping them with parenting and other resources, but were, out of conviction, opposed to the concept of abortion. But the city of Austin thought that was too weird, and by its ordinance, forced the pro-life resource centers to post signs at their entrance disclaiming the services they did not perform, while pro-abortion groups were not required to post any sign or disclaimer. First Liberty Institute filed a federal lawsuit seeking to invalidate that ordinance on behalf of 3 pregnancy resource centers. The argument was pretty simple. The free speech clause of the First Amendment prevents the city governments from compelling the speech of religious organizations like these pregnancy centers, and by requiring the disclaimers by religious organizations while exempting secular organizations, cities violate the First Amendment's religion clauses. Well, it took a few years of litigation, but those unconstitutional ordinances in Austin are gone. Cities contemplating the idea of following Austin's example should be advised that not only will they lose in court, like the city of Austin, you will have to pay our attorney fees for such illegal action. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Not only the host of a radio program, but oftentimes I'm a guest on a radio program. This morning, I was specifically asked on a program, what about this deal with Carrier and what Donald Trump did? Obviously, it saved 1,100 jobs, but are we setting a bad precedent? And so I gave my answer, but then also said, in just a few hours, I'm going to have Michelle Malkin on Point of View. Never miss an opportunity to promote Michelle Malkin. And Michelle, in your book, Who Built That?, you have a chapter 2, The Wizards of Cool. air conditioning innovators, Willis Carrier and Irvin Lyle. You've studied the Carrier Corporation, but at the same time, as a conservative, I suspect you have a few of the hesitations that I do about Donald Trump using various tax breaks and maybe setting a precedent. What are your thoughts?
I do, but I think that the history of this company is so important to especially teach children about, because I think that not enough public figures and politicians really have an innate sense of embracing the American entrepreneurial spirit. And Carrier is one of those companies that really started out as a tiny startup, even before that term had entered the American business lexicon. It was a group of dedicated engineers who dug into their own pockets, borrowed money from their dentist because they had a great idea about innovating and bringing to market the mass manufacture of air conditioners, chillers, coolers that have really revolutionized modern American life. If not for Carrier, Jonas Salk would have not been able to manufacture his vaccines, because it was Carrier equipment that kept his labs at the right temperature. Movie theaters, shopping malls, even the Vatican uses a system that was built by the American innovators at Carrier. So here comes Donald Trump to smash a paradigm in American politics that has really taken hold under progressive big government politicians like Barack Obama, and that is that these national American-based companies should be able to do whatever they want, even if it harms American workers. And despite my qualms about government picking winners and losers, I think that this is a milestone, because Donald Trump threw down the gauntlet and said, look, I am the President of the United States of America, and if this one deal sends a message to other American companies that it will be a priority for American companies to put American workers and American jobs as something that should be important to them as they operate in our economy, I think in the end that's a very good thing.
Again, the book, Who Built That, came out a while back, but again, I enjoyed the book, as illustrated by the fact that I've got a book just coming out today, Technology and Social Trends. So you can see that both Michelle and I are kind of tech geeks. We're kind of fascinated by where this comes from, and we probably need therapy for it. But nevertheless, let's go back to some more phone calls here, and we'll go to South Carolina on the Good News Network. Nick, what would you like to ask?
Yes, I'm very happy to talk to you again, Kerby, and especially to Michelle, because I figured she kind of knows what's going on. I have been following this Slager case down in Charleston, and I think they're trying to railroad that guy. Yes. They show the video of him, Scott getting out of his car, and they show him being shot, but they don't show him where he beat up Slager and took his stun gun from him. And the other thing, and then I'll get off the phone, is I'd like to know what's going on with Glenn Beck. I think he's lost and gone off the rails.
Okay. You can answer either or both of those, Michelle.
Wow, a lot there. I would just say as a follow-up to the Slager case that it really does drive home a very important message about the instant reactions that people have to very curated and edited video clips. What you see is not necessarily what the truth is, and that's a large part of the reason why I'm so excited about doing CRTV, because it's not just about 20-second clips on the news and instant reactions and the manufactured outrage and fake news that you get from the corporate corrupt media, and we have the time and the space to actually explore all that. And in the case of the police officer that we're dealing with Daniel Holtzclaw, it was the same thing. You might think you know what happened, but you have to go to the original source documents. You have to do your homework. And when you have people like Van Jones now on CNN, someone who was a self-professed Marxist, communist, who worked for an anti-police organization and embraced convicted cop killer Mumia Abu-Jamal, now posing as a reasonable analyst and observer of news and politics, of course you have to question the source. You can't trust somebody like that. As far as Glenn Beck, I talked to him just the other day, and, well, this political season has affected people in many different ways. And my compassionate comment would be to counsel people that life is about more than elections, and life is about so much more than politics. I think it's tragic, Kerby, that so many people have cut off relationships,
yes,
won't talk to family and friends anymore, and I've seen that a lot on our side of the aisle as well. Life is too short, and we have to count our blessings and keep perspective.
We only have about a minute, but I know that you are a little bit hesitant looking at Betsy DeVos, who at one time looked like she endorsed Common Core, now says she does not. And I'm all for people flip-flopping, especially if they flop in the right direction. So I said that about Donald Trump. Yeah, he used to be pro-choice, but he looks like he's pro-life now. And if he flops to the right direction, I'll take that. But I think we have some reason to be skeptical, and I know you do as well.
I do, and mostly because over the last 7 years, I have covered the issue of Common Core and the ever encroachment of Fed Ed into our lives. And I know many, many, many grassroots, informed, active, engaged parents, especially moms in Michigan, who had to fight Betsy DeVos tooth and nail because she was funding our enemies, the people who want to usurp local control, meddle in our kids' lives, undermine student and family privacy. She talks a lot about choice, but you can't even begin to talk about school choice. It's completely meaningless and empty if you've got a massive Federal Department of Education that's using our own money to take away our choices in the curriculum and in our textbooks and classes. I would be very, very, very encouraging of people that they raise their voices and make sure that Donald Trump actually keep his promise and do what he said, end Common Core.
Well, and again, I would say that if you've enjoyed this hour with Michelle Malkin, you can go to CRTV and get 4 more hours, and before you're done, 13 hours. And I like that format because I'm always even frustrated when they get you on, even with people that like you, like Sean Hannity, and you get 10 minutes or 5 minutes. We've given you an hour, and after especially going through that case of Daniel, which took almost 2 hours of watching, you go, whoa, there's a lot here that was not covered by the corporate media, and that's why we're so grateful for what you're doing. So, Michelle Malkin, always great to have you on the program. CRTV.com is a good place to connect up with you, and we also have a link to your website. So thanks for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thanks so much, Kerby, and early Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you and everyone at Point of View.
Thank you so very much. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to kind of change topics, and I think you will enjoy that conversation as well. It gets us into a little bit more of kind of biblical theology and apologetics, and I think you'll enjoy that conversation as well. We don't try to be political every hour, so I think you'll enjoy that. And again, visit the website, pointofview.net. Michelle Malkin's material is there. We'll talk with Dr. Terry Mortenson about searching for Adam, Genesis, and the truth about man's origin. I think you'll really enjoy that. Matter of fact, if you have some kids, they might want to sit down and listen to this as well and learn a little bit more about the Bible. All of it available at the website, pointofview.net. And if you can support us and click on that button that says donate, we would greatly appreciate it. We'll be back with more right after this.
I remember when I could take a family of 4 out for a simple dinner, and the bill came to around $10 for all of us. That was only about 15 years ago, believe it or not. Now, no way. But here and there, we still go out because it's kind of important to us as a family. Well, I believe that point of view is important, an important investment in all of our families. This is a unique and special time together each weekday. Kerby equips us to make a difference and keeps us aware of what's important to our families. Today, I urge you, many are watching from the sidelines. We need you in the game. Some give. If that's you, thank you. Many need to step up. Join the team, Truth Team 360. You can learn the details at pointofview.net. At the top of the page, click on Become a Monthly Partner. That's right next to the Donate Now button. Become a Monthly Partner. We need you on the team. Please join us. Pointofview.net. Or pick up the phone, call 800-347-5151. That's 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Going to spend some time today talking about Adam and Eve, and this is not a small issue indeed. A number of years ago, when I was the president of the International Society of Christian Apologetics, we did an entire conference on, do we believe in a historic Adam? Because if you don't, then it changes everything in terms of your perspective about the Bible, about theology. Some people want to say, well, I only believe what Jesus has to say. Well, Jesus talked about a historic Adam and Eve, and about a Noah and a Jonah, and Paul talks about an Adam, and yet some people say, well, we believe in theistic evolution, and so there wasn't just an Adam, but there was sort of an Adam-like individual that eventually evolved into a human being. So it's not a small issue, and that's why we're going to spend an entire hour today working our way through this new book, Searching for Adam, Genesis and the Truth About Man's Origin. Now, we're not just going to look at that. We're going to look at the issue of human anatomy and some of the things which show that human beings are unique from other animals. And we're certainly going to spend some time talking about how this relates to Scripture and science. So I think you really want to kind of sit back and listen. But a little bit later, we'll give you a chance to ask questions as we open up the phones. Dr. Terry Mortenson is with us. He earned a Master of Divinity from Trinity Evangelical Divinity School and a PhD in the history of geology. He also has lectured on this creation evolution controversy in 25 different countries. Before he actually joined with Answers in Genesis back in 2001, he spent 26 years with a group called Campus Crusade for Christ, which you're very familiar with. And he brings just a wealth of information to this and is the editor of a series of essays here that I think are going to really help you understand this issue of Adam. So, Dr. Mortenson, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Good to be with you, Kerby.
I appreciate the good work that you've done. This was a monumental task, wasn't it, to bring together the different writings, the footnotes, and all of this. It's a very significant book. And if you would maybe indulge me for just a minute, talk about why it's so significant for people to know about a book that's 500 pages written by all these different scholars.
Well, I think in your introduction to the program today, you made it very clear that Adam is really foundational to the gospel. And one of the things I mention in the book, we're using quotes from evolutionists over the last 120 years, is they really see clearly that without a literal Adam and a literal fall, the gospel collapses. So it's really critical. And I just felt there was a need for a wide-ranging book that addressed this from different angles by men who are really expert in those issues.
And even though you didn't write all the chapters, I think you can probably address some of those. So let's start with the Old Testament. First of all, you have theological background, so certainly that is the case. But when we look at that, we have quite a bit of evidence for a literal belief in a historic Adam and Eve, don't we?
Oh, absolutely. There's good reason to conclude that Genesis 1 to 11 is historical narrative. As many readers will understand, there are different genres of Scripture. There's poetry and parable and prophetic visions, but Genesis has all the marks of historical narrative. And when we really look carefully at the details, it's clear that Genesis is describing a real man and a real woman in a real garden. And so Dr. Barrick, who wrote the first chapter, really unpacks all of that. And one verse that really is critical, well, actually two. the description of the creation of Adam and the one of Eve. Adam was, it says, God made man from the dust of the earth. He breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being or a living creature. The text does not say God made a living creature, breathed into it, and that became man.
Yeah.
The text is perfectly clear. And then with Eve, of course, she was made from a living creature, Adam, but verse 22 is describing supernatural surgery. There's no way you can harmonize either of those verses with evolution.
I would think so. One other point, just before we move on to the New Testament, is that some people, it was well-meaning, but it's, I think, flawed to try to protect the book of Genesis by saying, well, maybe the first 11 chapters are more like a metaphor or an allegory, and then the rest it looks more historical, because lots of people will say, oh, I believe there was a Moses and an Abraham, but I do have some problems with whether or not there was a Noah, a flood, and whether there's an Adam. Can we make that distinction between the first 11 chapters of Genesis and the rest of Genesis?
I don't think so at all. Again, as you alluded in your opening comments, both Jesus and Paul, and we could add Peter, whenever they refer to those first 11 chapters, they take it as straightforward history. And furthermore, chapter 11 ends with Abraham, and chapter 12 begins with Abraham. So there's no break in the narrative. And then you have a Hebrew word, toledot, that appears 11 times in Genesis, tying the whole book together. It's translated in English, these are the generations of, or this is the account of. And 3 of those, or 4 of those toledots are in the first 11 chapters. So it ties the whole book together as a historical account.
Let's, if we can, move on to the New Testament, and we've already sort of talked about Paul, but a lot of people will say, we've got a problem here because he's referring to the first Adam and then the second Adam. So whether you look at Romans 5, you look at 1 Corinthians 15, you look at a lot of passages, he tends to really bring those two together. And if there's a second Adam, which is Jesus, it would seem to imply, maybe I'm just being too simplistic, that there was a first Adam who really was a historical feature and a historical person, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. And then we look at the genealogy of Jesus in the Gospel of Luke, and he traces that lineage all the way back through David and Abraham to Adam. So if any person in that genealogical list is not a real person, then Jesus is descended from a metaphor, and that destroys his true humanity. So it's critical that we have a historical Adam. And Jesus himself, in Mark chapter 10, when he was asked a question about divorce by the Pharisees, said, have you not read? Go back to the beginning of Genesis. And he quotes from Genesis 1 and 2, God created marriage as a man and a woman for life. And Jesus takes that historical fact as his foundation for his teaching on marriage.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Dr. Terry Mortenson. The book is entitled Searching for Adam, Genesis and the Truth About Man's Origin. It's one of the master books, which we've talked about before. You probably can find it in your local bookstore, but we have a link so that you can order it if you'd like to get it immediately. And as you do that, of course, it's available both in paperback and in Kindle. And we also, of course, have a link to answersingenesis.org, so you can order it there as well. I've tried to make it very easy for you to get a copy of this. And as we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about why this has become so important, why individuals, oftentimes identifying themselves as evangelicals, say, well, maybe we don't really need to believe in historic Adam, and hence the reason for this book, and hence the reason for talking about it today here on Point of View, and also talk about maybe why did it disappear. Eugene Merrow has written a very good piece in here about Where Are You, Adam?, the disappearance of Adam and the death of truth. And then we'll get into some of the arguments for the distinctions between humans and animals. So we've got a lot to cover, and we'll do so right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Today is December 7th, a day that President Roosevelt said would be a date which would live in infamy. On that fateful morning of December 7th, 1941, America was attacked without warning. More than 2,400 Americans died and 1,100 were wounded. Our country was changed forever. This attack led us into war, and the citizens of America responded with courage and resolve. So it may be well to reflect on what took place and how we today must also rise to the occasion of an attack on America more than a decade ago. Today is known as National Pearl Harbor Remembrance Day. It is a day when we honor the lives lost in that attack on Pearl Harbor and also honor the veterans of World War II. But it can also be a day in which we also pay tribute to the men and women who are currently serving in the armed forces in an effort to promote freedom and justice around the world. If you travel to Hawaii, you need to stop at the memorial in Pearl Harbor. The USS Arizona stands as a testimony to the 177 crew members who died as a result of the attack on December 7th. I understand that more than 40 million visitors have visited that memorial and have therefore honored their heroic efforts of the sailors and Marines. If you've been there, you know that it has become a sacred place as well as a reminder of what can happen when others, either a nation or terrorists, attack this nation. In 1941, the enemies of the United States were Japan and Germany. Today, they're our friends, but we have new enemies, terrorists who want to destroy us and destroy our way of life. We are protected from their evil intentions by those who serve in uniform. So today, take a moment to reflect on your freedom that was bought with a price, and honor those who died for your freedoms and honor those who protect you today. December 7th is an important day, and I didn't want it to pass without challenging you to consider its importance. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Power of Three and Smith Global Media present Believe. One boy's decision to believe could change everything. Believe, rated PG, now playing. Believe.film.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us today Terry Mortenson, and we'll be talking about his book, Searching for Adam, Genesis and the Truth About Man's Origin. And if you'd like to join our conversation a bit later, we'll open up the phones. But Terry, I thought for just a minute, we might move to chapter 4 in the book, the whole question about the disappearance of Adam. Some of our listeners might say, okay, I'm glad you're talking about this, but I believe there's an Adam. Jesus talked about an Adam. Paul talked about an Adam. Peter talks about an Adam. The early church fathers believed in this. So what's the deal? Well, the deal is that you can go to a lot of Christian colleges. You know this only so well. And Ken Ham and I have talked about this before, where there is a belief in theistic evolution. And so then they have to figure out, well, where does Adam fit? And then, of course, you already start having theological problems, because if there's no Adam and there's no fall in Genesis 3, then why do we need a Savior? Or if there is death and killing and extinction before Adam and Eve, then that seems to be contradictory to the book of Genesis. So if you can, for a minute, talk about why we are even dealing with this. Where did we get to a situation where we felt we had to jettison and remove the idea of a historic Adam?
Well, it's because, obviously, for over 100 years, since Darwin published his Descent of Man, the scientific majority has been just hammering the culture with those famous pictures of man evolving from an ape-like creature over millions of years. And so that's been just an overwhelming influence in the culture. But also in the last, I'd say the last 10 or 15 years, there's been a growing questioning or even denial of a literal Adam by professing evangelicals. And so there have been a number of books that have come out. Just a couple of years ago, there was a debate book by Zondervan, 4 Views on the historical Adam. Only one of the writers contributing to that was believed in all of the details of Genesis about a literal Adam. And then I was just at the annual meeting of the Evangelical Theological Society, which met in San Antonio this year, just before Thanksgiving. And there are 4 new books by 4 different, ostensibly evangelical publishers, all promoting evolution and millions of years. And one of those is definitely denying that Adam ever existed, that Adam is a myth. So, and another one was also arguing that Adam was mythological. So it's a serious, serious problem in the church.
I think so. Let's look at some of the theology and then the science. Now, your chapter, When Was Adam Created, really deals with that issue because we've already sort of talked a little bit about whether or not the first 11 chapters are historical, but it also brings up a major theological issue. Was there death before the fall? Because either you hold to a view that because we have death and decay and destruction, because we have physical evil as well as moral evil, that's due to the fall, Genesis 3. Or you accept that that happened before that tornadoes and there was death and nature red in tooth and claw. And so you have a major theological issue if you don't believe that there was a historical Adam and Eve and a historical fall, don't you?
That's exactly right. And one of the things that, one of the ideas that's very prevalent in the church today is that the only thing that really happened at the fall was that man died spiritually. But that is just not what Genesis 3 says, and it doesn't fit with what Romans chapter 8 says, which talks about the fact that the whole creation is now in bondage to corruption, waiting to be set free and liberated. And the Genesis 3 will be removed. So this is of years before Adam, of evolution and death and disease, just destroys the whole biblical picture of creation, fall, and redemption.
Let's, if we can, get to another aspect. So we talk about the fall. Let's talk about the other pack. We so often on this program talk about the fact that human beings are created in the image of God, and so they're image bearers. If you believe in theistic evolution, then you have to say, well, somewhere one of those apes, one of those pongid apes, maybe the Neanderthals, maybe Australopithecus or something, maybe God supernaturally gave them a soul, which is difficult to say when that would take place. So don't we also, as you talk about in chapter 7, have to address Adam and this whole issue of the image of God, don't we?
Oh, absolutely. And, we see in our culture and in Europe court cases about giving the same legal rights that humans have to chimpanzees and others. Now, thinking with a biblical worldview, we would never want to advocate misuse of animals and cruel treatment of animals, but it is critical to the biblical worldview to understand that man is not simply an animal. Man is distinct and unique, and that informs our understanding of our relationship with the non-human world, as well as our view of man, of the sanctity of human life, of how we deal with people who have physical disabilities. It plays out in graphic way in what we've seen in Nazi Germany and in the eugenics movement and the whole abortion movement. So it's critical to have a real grasp of the unique image of God in man.
Again, talking with Dr. Terry Mortenson, and the book is entitled Searching for Adam, Genesis and the Truth About Man's Origin. We've looked at some of the theological issues. We'll start, just before we take a break here, looking at some of the scientific ones. And one of the questions I'm sure, Terry, people have is, well, what about these ape-like creatures? I just alluded to a few of them. Zinjanthropus, Australopithecus, Neanderthal, some of those. And in Chapter 8, there are some very helpful diagrams, which are hard to kind of show on television or even in radio, because you really have to kind of look at them in some detail. So that's why getting a copy of the book helps. But again, how about this? Because do we have fossil evidence that shows that human beings indeed evolved from these ape-like creatures?
Well, the simple answer is no. And Dr. David Menton wrote that chapter. He was for 34 years professor of human anatomy at Washington Medical School in St. Louis, and he has done extensive study on the claims of evolutionists and looked at the fossil evidence himself from the published literature. And in his chapter, he goes through, he helps lay down some basic principles to help readers when they go to the natural history museums to know what to look for to spot the deceptive artwork in comparison to the actual fossils and that kind of thing. But then he also goes through every one of the creatures that are displayed in a traveling presentation that's going to public libraries all across America, promoting human evolution. And he just goes through each one of them and shows they're not really what the evolutionists are claiming. They're either fully ape or fully man or imaginary creatures.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll try to answer the question about, what about Neanderthal man and Neanderthals? Marvin Lubenow, who's been on the program with us, it's been years since he's been on with us, is the author of that particular chapter. And then we'll get into some of the DNA evidence and a variety of other issues, and also talk about its implications. Because if you do believe in evolution, if you do believe in survival of the fittest, if you do believe in, as the subtitle of Origin of Species talks about, favored races, does that not lead to racism, eugenics, maybe even genocide? I think that it does. We'll talk about that. And most importantly, we want to open up the phones to give you a chance to join our conversation. That number is 1-800-351-1212. Dr. Terry Mortenson with us. He is the editor of this book and also one of the contributors to the book Searching for Adam, Genesis and the Truth About Man's Origin. We have a link to answersingenesis.org. You don't have to know how to spell it. All you have to do is click on his picture. That will take you there and find some great material that you can use based upon some of the good work at Answers in Genesis. Might also mention that as you go to the website, we have quite a bit of other information. We have my commentary today. We also have a video for you to watch. And don't forget, we've been encouraging you to join with us in our trip to Alaska. Penna Dexter, Kelly Shackelford, their families will join me and my family and you, and we really hope that you will join us there. Matter of fact, one of the topics we will address on the cruise is the issue of design, intelligent design, creation, and some of that, as well as many of the political issues we discuss every day. So I hope that you'll join us. It's an opportunity for you to spend time with the people that are part of our roundtable discussion, and it's also an opportunity for you to join with us as we explore the wilderness of Alaska. We're looking forward to it. So again, take the time to click on that button and get a brochure and make a decision, because we'd love to see you. We'll be right back.
When you hear the phrase spiritual warfare, what comes to mind? If you have a negative reaction, that's unfortunate, because the Bible reveals that the battle is real. As Kerby recently wrote to our partners, Romans 12:2 tells us not to be conformed to the culture, but to be transformed by the renewal of our minds. It warns us about being taken captive by alien philosophies and deceit. There is a spiritual battle underway for the minds of our neighbors. It's a time when the shapers of our culture are calling evil good and good evil. What can you do? Get a copy, a free copy, of Kerby Anderson's new ebook, Spiritual Warfare, The Battle to Restore Christ in Our Culture. It is a spiritual battle, and it must be fought with spiritual weapons. Get your copy with our compliments at pointofview.net. Look for Spiritual Warfare, pointofview.net. Spiritual Warfare, The Battle to Restore Christ in Our Culture, by Kerby Anderson. It's free when you visit pointofview.net.
Point of View will continue after this. of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Privileged to have with us Dr. Terry Mortenson as we talk about the book that he is the editor and contributor to, Searching for Adam, Genesis and the Truth About Man's Origins. 1-800-351-1212. Terry, let's jump over to chapter 10 for just a minute because it relates very much to one of the questions our callers have about genetics and this idea of mitochondrial DNA. So let's go to Texas first. KAVX Clyde, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hi. Several years ago, I read in a scientific journal that all mitochondrial DNA had been traced back to a woman in Africa. They said about 100,000 years ago, and I was wondering, isn't that kind of a proof of an Eve?
It is in one sense in that it says that there weren't multiple origins to humanity, but it doesn't fit with the biblical idea. But I thought we would add to it because this chapter is fascinating, Terry, because I teach on creation, as you may know, and yet this study of human mitochondrial DNA. Now, again, we've got to explain this for just a minute. You have the DNA that is used, of course, to produce your children and governs all sorts of different bodily functions. But then you have some DNA in your mitochondria, which is in your cell. But people have used that, and of course, the secular scientists all acknowledge that there's an Eve, but they put it in quotes. They don't mean a biblical Eve. But if you look at some of the research that is documented by Nathaniel Geeson and Jeffrey Tompkins, the prediction for evolution in terms of the DNA differences for evolution and the prediction for what a creationist would say show that the actual evidence actually seems to be a much better argument for creation rather than evolution. Explain if you might.
Well, I'm not a geneticist, so you're way ahead of me on that, and I worked really hard with these two brilliant geneticists to get this chapter to be a compelling argument for a reader that is versed in genetics, but also understandable to a person who has no expertise in that subject. So it's Nathaniel and Jeffrey are just arguing that when we really look at the evidence of the mitochondrial and mutation rates, it all points to a confirmation of the biblical view of human origins and even the time, how long ago Adam and Eve existed.
Sure. And again, the argument, and it's a simple one, really, if you think about it. If you think of DNA as like beads on a string, if evolution is true, and we have been here for millions and millions and millions of years, then you would expect that there would be random mutations every once in a while. So some of the beads on the string would change colors, if you just want to use that as a visual illustration. And if indeed you see that very few of those beads have changed, you say, well, that looks like arguments, first of all, for creation, and second of all, arguments for a young Earth. And so they do that not just for human DNA, which Clyde was talking about, but they do it for fruit flies and fleas and roundworms and all sorts of things. In other words, if you didn't know there was a theory of evolution, and you were just looking at the DNA, in other words, you were a molecular biologist, Terry, you would say, there sure seems to be a lot more evidence for design, a lot more evidence for a recent creation, though a flawed one because mutations came about after the fall, we would believe. And so you would come to a conclusion that would be just the opposite of evolution. And you might say, why aren't more scientists coming out and saying, wait a minute, the evidence we have in our laboratory actually seems to contradict the theory of evolution. Terry, can you speak to why it's probably not a career-advancing move to, if you're in a public university, to come out and say that you have evidence for creation rather than evolution? Can you speak to that?
Well, yes. And in fact, in my introduction to this book, I referred to another book that had a paleontologist contribute a chapter, and his chapter was anonymous, and it was because he would probably suffer some serious professional difficulties if his colleagues at the academic institution knew that he had written the chapter. There's tremendous pressure in the scientific community to go along with what the majority thinks. And ultimately, this whole question of origins is spiritual in nature, because if there is a God who made the world and made man, and we are morally accountable to him, then we have some serious thinking to do about what he says about our sin problem and his solution, the Lord Jesus Christ. And if there is no God, then you can just live your life any way you want to. So there's a whole spiritual dimension to this that a lot of people want to deny and say, well, it's just science, but it's not really. And so it's a critical issue.
Certainly is. Let's, if we can, get back to one that I did mention before the break, Neanderthals. You know, Terry, all sorts of people saying, well, what about Neanderthal? But Marvin Lubenow spends some time helping us understand that once we really started looking at the fossil evidence, once we looked at the DNA evidence, we could honestly say that, you know, I don't think you are dealing with some kind of transitional form between the apes and humans. If anything, the cranial capacity of Neanderthals was larger than ours, so they may have been on the way down rather than the way up. Individuals that later got off the ark were an isolated population, but maybe even scientists today say that may have interbred with human beings, because I think we're talking about human beings, aren't we?
Oh, exactly. And Dr. Lubenow has been studying this issue for over 25 years, and particularly Neanderthals. And he shows that, you know, they had the gene for that's associated with human speech. They buried their dead ceremonially. They had controlled use of fire. There's even evidence that they had jewelry and used makeup, and they built boats and they built homes from animal skins. That all the archaeological evidence shows these are true humans. And interestingly, I was speaking in California a couple of years ago, and I gave a lecture on human origins, and a man came up to me afterwards and said, you need to use me in your talk in the future, and let me take his picture. And he's originally from Lithuania, and his DNA has been mapped, and he has 3% Neanderthal DNA. But he was not primitive. He worked in technical support for Google.
Yeah, if nothing else, I've always said that if you put a Neanderthal man in a suit, probably no one would pay attention to him unless it'd be a football recruiter. It looks like he'd make a great middle linebacker in terms of the way some of them were built. But other than that, let's, if we can, maybe answer before we run out of time here in this last half hour, this so what question. A lot of people say, well, it's really nice to know about Adam and Eve and all that. But there is a very significant concern that if you accept evolution, then you begin to, maybe like Darwin, accept the fact that there were superior races. So isn't it at least possible, and haven't we seen this in our culture and our history, that sometimes evolution led to racism, evolution led to eugenics and the idea of certain favored races? I know Dr. Jerry Bergman writes about that in your book, and it seems to me that there are some consequences to an evolutionary worldview, aren't there?
Oh, absolutely. Adolf Hitler was an evolutionist, and he applied that to his social solution, quote unquote, to the Jewish question. The communists are all evolutionists, and Joseph Stalin murdered more people in Russia than Hitler did. Mao Zedong and the Pol Pot regime were evolutionist-based communist systems that slaughtered millions. And as Dr. Bergman shows, the imperialistic moves of the Japanese in the Second World War were driven by evolutionist thinking. So this has been devastating. Now, we always want to quickly add that just because someone is an evolutionist doesn't mean he goes out and murders people.
Yeah.
But I know evolutionists who are really nice, upstanding citizens. But the evolutionary view, if you really begin to implement it in your thinking, in your worldview, in your application to politics and social relationships, it is devastating. And the same applies with Margaret Sanger, who founded Planned Parenthood, And Charles Darwin's relative, I can't remember now, his nephew or whatever.
Francis Galton and some of those?
Yeah, was a eugenicist.
Right.
And so they advocated forced sterilization and, of course, the whole push to abort babies. And now, what we're seeing, that the number of Down syndrome babies have been decreasing in number recently, and research has indicated it's because 90% of Down syndrome babies in the womb are aborted. So it's a serious problem.
And a lot of that's in Chapter 13 of the book. We'll come back and conclude our remarks right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. In 2010, the city of Austin, Texas, a town that takes pride in keeping itself weird, passed an ordinance that targeted pro-life Christian pregnancy resource centers. These centers, as you may guess, care for women during their pregnancies, helping them with parenting and other resources, but were, out of conviction, opposed to the concept of abortion. But the city of Austin thought that was too weird, and by its ordinance, forced the pro-life resource centers to post signs at their entrance disclaiming the services they did not perform, while pro-abortion groups were not required to post any sign or disclaimer. First Liberty Institute filed a federal lawsuit seeking to invalidate that ordinance on behalf of 3 pregnancy resource centers. The argument was pretty simple. The free speech clause of the First Amendment prevents the city governments from compelling the speech of religious organizations like these pregnancy centers, and by requiring the disclaimers by religious organizations while exempting secular organizations, cities violate the First Amendment's religion clauses. Well, it took a few years of litigation, but those unconstitutional ordinances in Austin are gone. Cities contemplating the idea of following Austin's example should be advised that not only will they lose in court, like the city of Austin, you will have to pay our attorney fees for such illegal action. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
For a few more minutes, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Although I suspect many of you just want to sit back and listen because there's so much good information in this book, Searching for Adam, Genesis, and the Truth About Man's Origin. I do teach a course every year at a Bible school on creation, and there are all sorts of things in some of these chapters I've never seen before. So a lot of great material, but we might take another phone call in just a minute. But one of the other questions, Terry, that people sometimes have is, well, if the Bible story is true, what about all these other like flood traditions and things like that, and creation traditions and things of that nature? Now, my argument is that the fact that we have so many stories about a flood and about individuals being saved on a boat or even a dugout canoe, depending on where you are in the world, And I think Tim Chafee, who works with you at Answers in Genesis there, has done a good job of showing that if indeed you sort of take the biblical account as true, which we do, then you can almost sort of see the story beginning to spread out from the biblical story, and why you find even in very remote parts of the world stories about people being saved in a dugout canoe in a flood, about there being a fall, about there being transgression, and those kinds of things. And so I think that's another very powerful argument. So what's oftentimes used as an argument against the Bible seems to me to be a very good argument for the truthfulness of the Bible, don't you think?
Yes, I do. And another important point related to that is that these stories are all over the world, and in cultures, they were found in cultures that had not had any contact with Jewish or with Christian missionaries. So the argument that, well, the missionaries brought these ideas in and then they were corrupted is just not consistent with the facts. And the fact that there are so many in diverse cultures does speak to the fact that it's reflecting a common human memory of actual events that are accurately recorded and preserved for us in the book of Genesis.
Let's take some more phone calls. We'll head first to South Carolina. WLPG Hugh, you're on with Dr. Terry Mortenson.
Thanks for the opportunity to ask a question of you and Dr. Mortenson. In Genesis 1, of course, 1 and 2, the comment about the earth being formless and void. And question for Dr. Mortenson, I'm not sure. I understood from my similar trainings that verb was could also be translated became. And if that is true, and I need to check back with some of my Hebrew scholarly friends and pursue that, but in Isaiah 45:18, it says, for thus says the Lord God who created the heavens, He is God who formed the earth and made it. He established it and did not create it a waste place. And that word waste place, tohu, is the same Hebrew word that's used back in Genesis 1. There are two words in Genesis 1, tohu wabohu. And the fact that Isaiah says it was not created a waste place, Genesis 1 says it was or could be, became a waste place. The question that I have is, when Satan was cast out into the earth, we understand obviously before the Garden of Eden scene, and thus, in my thinking, perhaps the darkness of physical and also symbolic that covered the earth into which God brought light, of course, in the six-day creation process, in which I believe. If Satan was cast out since Satan was cast out into the earth, it seems to me that could have caused great catastrophic events on the globe, geological, etc., and something of magnitude that we could not even imagine, and that scientists could be only judging the appearance of age and not the real age. And if we have the ability to antique and make things look aged when they aren't, and lots of other things can be done. You bring pressure to coal and make diamonds supposedly. I can't help but believe that Satan being cast out into the earth caused all sorts of calamities on the earth. And when Isaiah says that it was formed to be inhabited, that could it have been inhabitable at the moment of its creation? God had not yet made man, but it was made to be inhabited and was inhabitable, and Satan's being cast into the earth brought all sorts of destruction. If there were plants and animals on the earth that was inhabitable, then you've got possible coal and oil reserves already there, as well as the flood itself. So
only got a few minutes, so again, it deserves an entire program. But again, the fall of Satan and the issue of the appearance of age, Terry.
Yeah. Well, let me just say, if you look in English translations, they don't translate that Hebrew word became. It always was. And the best book for you to read on that is a book by Weston Fields called Unformed and Unfilled. It's a very thorough critique of the gap theory. It's just biblically not defensible. And as far as the fall of Satan, I would encourage you to look at Ezekiel 28, which also refers to the fall of Satan. Most Bible scholars agree. And it clearly indicates that Satan was in the Garden of Eden in an unfallen state. So the fall of Satan could not have been before the sixth day. I don't believe it was on the seventh day because God sanctified it. And furthermore, there is no scripture that indicates that God judged the creation or judged the earth when Satan fell. Ezekiel 28 only says that he was cast down to the earth. So I think in Isaiah, when it says that God made the world to be inhabited, that's exactly what he was doing. And in verse 2, he's just describing the initial state of the earth before God formed it and filled it as he intended. So on our website, we have the Answers Book, Volume 1, which has a chapter on the gap theory, and you can read that online. The whole book is online, and or you can buy the book also in our bookstore. But Unformed and Unfilled is the definitive critique of the gap theory. It's just not consistent with the biblical text. As far as God creating appearance of age, of course he did. He created the plants with fruit already on their branches. He created the animals in a mature adult form because he commanded them to be fruitful and multiply. He created Adam and Eve not as fertilized eggs or little infants, but as adult forms also ready to reproduce. But the appearance of age argument is not a good argument to use to explain the fossil record. Rather, Noah's flood, we believe, is the cause of most of the geological record of rock layers and fossils. So that's some thoughts on the problem with the gap theory.
And one more point I might just mention, as you go to answersingenesis.org, their latest post here just came out today, do varves, tree rings, and radiocarbon measurements proven older? So even as you go there and want to read some of the books, some of the blog posts there will be helpful as well. Well, Terry, it's just been a great program, and I really want to commend you and the other authors for this book, Searching for Adam, Genesis and the Truth About Man's Origin. I would imagine some people can find it in the local bookstore. It's published by Master Books, but if not, they can go to Answers in Genesis. We have a link there as well so that you can learn a little bit more about this issue, and you've done such a good job, and want to thank all the work that you do there at Answers in Genesis.
Well, great to be with you, Kerby. I appreciate your interest in the book and hope that it will be a great encouragement to God's people and a challenge to those who have maybe felt that they have to cave in to the pressure from the evangelical or from the evolutionist scientific majority.
Well, again, we've had Ken Ham and Bodie Hodge, and of course today we have Terry Mortenson and all sorts of people from Answers in Genesis. So go there and find out some more information. And again, I want to thank you for giving us an hour today here on Point of View. Let me just mention real quickly before we run out of time that you can find all the links to the information that we provide for you on the website, pointofview.net. You can find my viewpoints, commentary, video, and again, as I mentioned, I hope you might join with us in our Alaska cruise in August. So go to the website, pointofview.net. You can go there and click on the button that says donate and help us out. We would appreciate that as well. I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Shamila. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
Power of Three, in association with Smith Global Media, presents Believe. Christmas is a time to be thankful. But when tough times hit the small town of Grundy, Virginia, everything seems lost. This December,
all things are possible to those who believe.
One boy's decision to believe could change everything. Believe. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. Now play. More information is available at www.believe.film.
There is a spiritual battle underway for our minds and the minds of our neighbors. Romans 12:2 tells us not to be conformed to the culture, but to be transformed by the renewal of our minds. What can you do? Get a free copy of Kerby Anderson's new ebook, Spiritual Warfare, The Battle to Restore Christ in Our Culture. It is a spiritual battle, and it must be fought with spiritual weapons. Get your copy at pointofview.net. Look for Spiritual Warfare, The Battle to Restore Christ in Our Culture by Kerby Anderson. It's free, but only when you visit pointofview.net. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.